Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
All right, everyone, welcome to today's ASRG webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ASRG and get some of the legal stuff out of the way. ASRG is a non-profit organization founded to support the development of the automotive security industry. We have developed a platform and a community to share knowledge, communicate through networks, and to build value with collaboration. This is a community for you, built by you, with the goal to protect our friends and family when using automotive products. If you want to learn more about ASRG or get more involved, please visit our website at www.asrg.io or send us an email at hello@asrg.io. Before we jump into the presentation today, let's get some of the legal stuff taken care of. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of those that have made them. They do not represent views or opinions of ASRG and are to be considered as informational. The use of this information is to be used by the individual and or organization at their own risk.
Hi, my name is Jani Kovacs and welcome to ASRG's webinar about the quantum of cyber, a multidimensional risk analysis for end-to-end product resilience. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about how the multiple environments managing your vehicle data may harm the overall cybersecurity resilience of the vehicle and how can you overcome these challenges. I wish you a great time for the following video. First, let me introduce myself. Again, my name is Jani Kovacs. I'm proud to be a husband of a wonderful woman, and I'm a father of 2 brilliant daughters. I also happen to be an automotive cybersecurity enthusiast since 2014, and I work as a risk analyst at CymotiveJani. I'm also proud to be the visitor professor of University of Buda and a member of the ASRG Vulnerability Management Technical Committee. Once, I designed and implemented the Dimitri project, a cybersecurity awareness educational game for especially the automotive cybersecurity. Let me also introduce to you the company I'm proud to be the part of, CymotiveJani. CymotiveJani was founded in 2016 by the leaders of the Israeli National Security Services, and we are happy to be the selected cybersecurity partner of Volkswagen Group. We provide a full lifecycle smart mobility platform. We have a global footprint both in Israel, North America, Europe and Asia, and we have a really world-class growing workforce, more than 230 employees, most of them cybersecurity experts. As the topic of today's webinar is the end-to-end cybersecurity resilience of our vehicles, what else can we start than the cybersecurity lifecycle of a car? After that, we will see mostly what it takes to secure a vehicle. Then, we will see how to bypass a rock-solid security safeguard. After this, I will present my idea and view of the multidimensional cybersecurity risk analysis, and then I will provide some practical example of a typical ECU project. After this, a mostly offline questions and answer session will follow that I hope will have a lot of questions and a lot of answer as well. How does the cybersecurity lifecycle of a vehicle look like or should look like nowadays? It all starts with the development. During the threat modeling and the risk analysis, the cybersecurity threats are learned and their harm that can be done by them is understood. Using the threats and using the damage scenarios, the cybersecurity risk is defined and our control over the cybersecurity risk is being understood. The compilation of these cybersecurity controls is then formalized in the specifications, and according to the specification, they are implemented in the vehicle and in the vehicle components. After the implementation, a verification and the validation process should be started, which should ensure that the cybersecurity controls are implemented in an appropriate manner and the cybersecurity risk is managed appropriately. After the development, the production starts. During the production, the personalization of the vehicle is done. During the personalization, security certificates are generated in a unique manner for each vehicle, and also security manifests are issued which contain the access rights of each entity inside and outside of the vehicle. After this, the security configuration is done, where, for example, the debug interfaces are disabled for each ECU, the production and engineering functionality related to the vehicle functionalities are disabled or restricted, and in the end of the production line, it will result in a vehicle that is resilient against the cyber threats, and the vehicle is being shipped to the customer, to us. After this, the longest interval starts, the operation. But we should not rest even during this operation. We must continuously monitor for new security threats, for new security vulnerabilities that are discovered in relation with our vehicle, in relation with our vehicle fleet, as in this case, we are the manufacturers. If a new vulnerability is learned, then the vulnerability management process should be started, and during the vulnerability management process, we should understand the impact of this vulnerability to the overall cybersecurity risk posture of our vehicle. If this cybersecurity risk will exceed the risk threshold of our organization in relation with cybersecurity, then this vulnerability shall be controlled by some technical or administrative countermeasure. This can be, for example, a security patch in a most obvious way. A security patch will contain the mitigation of the risk, and this security patch will be pushed out to the vehicle and being installed in the format of security updates. But the cybersecurity lifecycle of a vehicle doesn't end even after the retirement. During the retirement, we as manufacturers should notify our customers about the end of the support, and we should also ensure the forward secrecy of any proprietary data like intellectual property or private data such as the private information of our road users. So these should be managed by the vehicle type. What does it take to secure a vehicle then? To secure a vehicle, is it enough to secure the IT infrastructure? Until the end of the last decade, people used to think so. But if we think that if the IT infrastructure is secure, then, for example, unauthorized users won't be able to access to the source codes, won't be able to access to the security credentials, the access credentials, won't be able to access the intellectual property manifested by the products, or until a certain point they won't be able to do so, which is pretty great. But the problem is that the vehicle doesn't exist only in the IT infrastructure of the manufacturer organizations, right? So, thankfully, in the middle of the last decade, people realized eventually that we need to actually embed security controls to the vehicles, because the vehicles are not in the development infrastructures. The vehicles are out on the road and out in the garages, and they need to be secure against cybersecurity threats that might targeting them on the roads, in the garages, because the EE layer, the electrical and electronical layer, the computerized layer is increasing constantly inside them, and the external interfaces are present in more and more in-depth way in relation with the daily operation of the vehicle. So we need to embed cybersecurity controls in the vehicle. And now, thankfully, it is some basic fundament of automotive cybersecurity. But the vehicle doesn't only exist in the development infrastructure as form of prototypes and source codes, and doesn't only exist in the form of ready-made vehicles on the road, but they also exist in the supply chain, and they also exist in the manufacturing and assembly lines of the vehicle manufacturers. So it is really similar than the situation with the power plants and the situation of the civil engineering facilities. If they got hacked, then there can be a big trouble for all of us. If the manufacturing lines, if the supply chain gets hacked, that's also a huge problem for all of us. So the OT infrastructure, the operational technology infrastructure in connection with the vehicles should also be secured. But that's not all. Because just considering the vehicle as a complex ecosystem realized in the IT infrastructure, on the road, in the vehicle, and in the assembly lines, and in the back-end infrastructure of the assembly lines, there are a lot of data that has direct or indirect relation to the cybersecurity resilience of the vehicle. And this presentation, this webinar is all about this concern. This webinar is all about that the secure vehicle is only possible if these three pillars, the infrastructure, the embedded cybersecurity controls, and the manufacturing backend security, the OT security, are all cooperating in relation and in scope with the vehicle. So cooperation is the key for that. And I'm not meaning that you should secure the IT infrastructure with firewalls. And that's all. I'm not meaning that you should keep your assembly lines, for example, decoupled from the internet. And this way you will be secure. It's also not possible because there are a lot of information, even cybersecurity information, that should flow through your internal networks at least. And a certain level of network connection is necessary for both the vehicles, for both the OT infrastructure and both the IT infrastructure. So what are these information? What is the data that is present in all of these ecosystems? And if get hacked, then the vehicle and the safety of all of our lives might be harmed. Let us see in the following slides. Because how to bypass a rock-solid cybersecurity safeguard? Let's just consider that, for example, we made a completely appropriate, completely robust cybersecurity control for securing the diagnostic layer. For example, the latest standard version of the UDS specifies the OX29 authentication for authenticating the users by a more appropriate and much more robust way than the OX27 security access and diagnostic service did. Because the old one, the security access, used a challenge response authentication, and the cryptographic material, the keys, the access credentials that should be used for this authentication was present in every service device that were basically having the access right to initiate those specific diagnostic services, like turning on a feature or modifying some tuning parameters, and so on and so on. So if you had these kind of devices, then you were able to initiate these kind of services in the diagnostics, and it was really hard to be monitored, if not impossible, if someone had the proper technical knowledge to hide their traces. Okay, what is the authentication OX29 diagnostic service different from that? It is different because it leverages the authentication by the backend server and basically extending the authentication to the backend server from the tester tool in itself. In practice, the users of this service should first authenticate to the backend server, and then the backend server will be the one authenticating the user to the vehicle by using certificate-based digital signatures in a structured way. It looks like completely rock solid if we think from technical perspective, right? If the backend server is secure, then the signatures will be basically not tamperable, because you cannot tamper a digital signature unless you have the access to the private keys, and the private keys are stored in the backend servers, right? Then, how can we bypass it? For example, if someone, and this was the key, someone basically do not pay appropriate attention to the protection of the private keys in the backend server, then if the backend server gets hacked, then the hackers already having the private key are able to initiate legit transactions on the vehicles, even on the vehicles that using these kind of rock-solid cybersecurity safeguards. So these pictures depict the following. Even if you implement something that is really resilient technically from cybersecurity attacks, if you ignore certain aspects that have a direct impact or indirect impact in the cybersecurity of that safeguard, for example, inappropriate protection of the private keys, then the castle of rock will be a castle of sand. That's bad news for all of us automotive cybersecurity professionals, right? Take another example. For example, the manufacturer tries to protect the confidentiality of the software image with symmetric encryption to prevent the access to the proprietary information, to the intellectual property, for example, during the software update processes. In this case, the software images can be basically freely distributed even without worrying that the intellectual property will be accessible by the adversaries, or the adversaries will be able to reverse engineer the software for gaining the understanding of some vulnerabilities perhaps in the solution. Okay, this confidentiality protection, let's say a symmetric encryption of AES 256. AES 256 is a really proper solution even concerning the National Commercial Algorithm Suite standards and such. So we are completely good, right? Yes, until the point that someone will try to steal this key or even the software image in plain text, even either from the development infrastructure or either from the production side, because we need to share this kind of informations with certain people to keep the organization going, to keep the manufacturing going, to keep the business going. The manufacturers, for example, the manufacturing plants won't be able to flash the software in an encrypted way until the key will be installed to the ECU. So it is really hard to prevent the leak of this kind of information during the whole multiple decades life cycle. But considering these, the AES encryption is just as effective as the swordsmanship of the following big guy in the following scene from Indiana Jones. I think most of us remembers completely well for this scene when the big guy comes from the crowd swinging the sword, but Indy has another solution. This is kind of the situation with the example cited in the previous minutes. In my humble opinion, the biggest problem is that even if the vehicle ecosystem is secured with completely appropriate, rock-solid cybersecurity safeguards, there are a lot of other ways to get these kind of informations that might in the end harm the vehicle, because the vehicle ecosystem is, like the title of this webinar, a multidimensional creature. It has a quantum nature because the information that is in the end or in one way manifested by the physical vehicle itself are present in another dimensions. For example, the development environment, for example, the production OT systems, and for example, the garage workshops. The garage workshops is a complete nightmare if we think about that, because the garage workshops are in a situation that is in a lot of cases completely independent from the manufacturers, using only some kind of subscriptions, paying some fees, but they have not much controls. These manufacturers do not have so much controls on these garage workshops. The latest standards, for example, the diagnostic authentications, were a huge advancement by incorporating backend systems in the diagnostic authentications, because this way the garage workshops, the activity of the garage workshops can be monitored. But still, just consider that how much access do these workshops have and how much data in relation with the vehicles have outside the manufacturer perimeter. So there are the development infrastructure, there are the production OT system, there are the garage workshops. If someone, for example, infiltrates the productions and gets the access to the data that is, for example, not even completely known by the organization that is present. For example, there are some flashing images, and the importance of the data of these flashing images is not completely known and understood by the manufacturing guys, because they are not knowing what is embedded in the software image. This can cause some devastating issues, because if someone infiltrates these systems, any one of these systems, then a lot of problems can happen. There are cryptographic keys. If I get the cryptographic key, for example, I can decrypt the information and get the understanding of secret data. If I get the cryptographic keys for diagnostic access, then I will be able to initiate diagnostic transactions which I am not authorized for. If I get the understanding of, for example, unpatched vulnerabilities from the development systems, that way I can get the understanding of how to hack cars without the huge need for doing all of the reconnaissance work, which is like horrible stuff. Just think about the average bug tracking system of an organization. You, as an organization, are mandated to track your bugs and track your defects in the system because of the IATF standard, because of even the ISO standards, the ISO 26262, the ISO SAE 21434. You are mandated to do so, but if you do not think of access controls in those defect tracking systems, then everyone in your organization will be able to access the issues that are currently active in your products, containing the cybersecurity issues as well. This is a nightmare if we think this way. You have no control, for example, over 1,000 or 2,000 people getting the access to these unpatched vulnerabilities in real time in your organization. There is the intellectual property, also stuff that has a really huge exposure of people you do not really have control over in your organization, or sometimes even outside of the organization. And there are, for example, the on-demand function activation that can be abused by the garage workshops or by the inappropriate configuration happening in the production OT systems. But let's just think the half of it is something that I think present in most of the organizations, and this is why I made this webinar, to pull the attention on these issues. Let us see a practical example. In 2022, Griluigi1 was able to hack his Hyundai Ioniq. I'm not sure if Griluigi1 is a she or a he, but yes, in my head, Luigi, who is green, is a guy with a mustache. In the video game, I will refer to him as a he. So Griluigi1 hacked his Hyundai Ioniq by a completely outside of the box solution, because the vehicle had a technically appropriate cybersecurity solution for protecting the unauthorized modification of its firmware. But what did Griluigi1 do with this safeguards, and how to bypass the safeguards without even actually touching the vehicle? First, Griluigi1 acquired the firmware package. Using the firmware package, he analyzed the firmware package for the presence of any cryptographic keys that might protect the software update solution, and that might be used later to overcome or override the cybersecurity controls and even bypass them. He acquired the software signing public key after a lot of thorough reconnaissance. So just a disclaimer, in this presentation it sounds way easier than it was for him in real life, and big respect for this Griluigi1. So he acquired the software signing public key. It was at that moment realized that the software signing public key is used for this, and if the public key is used for this, then a digital signature is used for the protection of the unauthorized manipulation of the firmware. And it was quite a disappointing experience, because these safeguards tend not to be bypassed easily or practically in any feasible way. But after this, Griluigi1 searched up the internet for the public key, and it became apparent that the public key is the pair of the private key, which is present in some open source documentation. I think it is the documentation of the RSA itself, and this private key was then learned, and this way Griluigi1 was in the possession of the key pair used for securing the software update. This was a huge vulnerability, because this way he was able to issue software that has a proprietary or not approved content not approved by the manufacturer, but still having the valid digital signature, and the root cause was that someone didn't change the private key used for signing the firmware package from the public one, which was first very likely used only for development purposes, but it was kind of forgotten, just like the writers of the Game of Thrones kind of forgot really important aspects. Then at Hyundai, unfortunately, someone kind of forgot to change the public private key, and then Griluigi was able to leverage this vulnerability in the software update to install actually his own proprietary version of the firmware containing the extra functions he wanted to install to the vehicle. And this way the vehicle ecosystem was not so secure after all. What happened if we just take a quick overview? First, the firmware package was easy to acquire online, which is kind of part of the general best practices of the operation, because this way you can push out software patches, security patches even, to the public, and the vehicles will be more secure in the end, should be at least. But the firmware package was not completely encrypted. Part of the firmware packages were encrypted, but GreenLuigi 1 was able to use parts of the plaintext to start such attacks that enabled him to decrypt the encrypted parts more easily. Then he was able to understand how the software worked, how the software protection worked via reverse engineering. Security should be not acquired through secrecy, so in itself it is not a huge problem, but the problem was that the security safeguard was easy to be penetrated, because even if it used the digital signature protection, it didn't use it with an appropriate key management. This way, the vulnerability was in the software, it was learned by GreenLuigi 1, and then the vehicle couldn't be considered to be secure anymore until that keys are changed. In my opinion, things get even more horrifying when we think of such devices like the Fiat bypass, which is an emergency start device. This device can be used if someone loses their ignition keys for the cars, and then this small device can be inserted to the OBD connector and then being used for basically bypassing the immobilizer function of the Fiat cars. And if we think about this in a more malicious, more adversarial thinking way, then we will understand that in the end this device can be used to stealing vehicles, right? This can, of course, solve these real issues, these rare occasions when someone loses their keys and they still need to start their vehicles, and then they need to bypass the immobilizer, for example, with only a mechanic key. But I think in a lot of cases it was abused to be used as a device of car thieves. And just keeping this device in our mind, think about someone get the access credentials for basically any of these environments listed on this picture. They get the access credentials, or they have the knowledge of vulnerabilities that are not patched in these vehicles. Then they are able to basically start implementing these kind of devices, even making them open source and putting them on GitHub, and then they are producing off-the-shelf exploits that car thieves and other adversary entities can use to violate the security of the roads, violate the safety of our everyday lives, and even if the vehicle ecosystem in itself was meant to be secured, in the end it will be vulnerable, and in the end our lives will be vulnerable through these vehicles. What should we do to prevent this from happening? I think first we need to start the analysis of the threats and assess the risks in the product itself, as it is done even today, and as it is proposed by the ISO standards and the UN regulations. After that, we have the strong fundaments for securing the vehicles, because the vehicle in itself will be technically secure. The next step the next step of evolution of automotive cybersecurity, even in my humble opinion, is starting when we start to catalog the occurrences of the product data in other environments. Every kind of product data that might have any implication of the security of the vehicle system. We should start the catalogization in the environment, such as the development infrastructure, such as the manufacturing lines, and for example the garage workshops, and even more environments if it's applicable. We need to understand that what are these product data. We need to understand that, if possible, how can these data be used against the vehicles, against the cybersecurity safeguards of the vehicles. When we managed to do so, then we will be able to start the evaluation and managing the cybersecurity risks that are manifested by these identified exposures. And for example, with the cybersecurity vulnerabilities known in the system that are present in the defect reporting, defect tracking systems, we might start to apply access restrictions on the need-to-know basis to let all the people get the knowledge of these vulnerabilities if they are need this information for their daily work. There is this kind of average ECU project, let's just say so. This average ECU project has the following informations on the ECU in the multiple environment. In the development, they have the requirements. If you know the requirements, then you are able to define your possible potential entry points and possible potential ways to hack the vehicle. They have the source code. The source code manifests a lot of information about the intellectual property, but the source code can be also monitored for possible ways to hack a car, for example by violation of safety and security coding standards, and basically any insufficiencies that are technically present in the vehicle, and that might introduce the vulnerabilities. The development environment also have this kind of vulnerability information, for example the known security vulnerabilities in the defect reporting system that might be used directly by the attackers. The development environment might be the one containing the security master credentials. In this average ECU project, this example average ECU project, it happens to have this information. So if someone gets the security master credentials, they will have the keys to the kingdom. The development environment also have the development function manuals. The development function manuals also contain the information how to manipulate the vehicle, how to manipulate the product, how to manipulate the ECU, because, for example, you need to tune the behavior of an electromechanical function on the test track. And the development environment also have the product architecture. I must tell you that the majority of this information won't give you the keys to the kingdom straight away, except only the security master credentials, but it will or might reduce drastically the required effort to find the vulnerability that you can hack in a vehicle, and this way the attackers will not be able to so skilled or will not be needing the huge time that otherwise would be needed to find the aforementioned vulnerabilities. Okay, this is the development. The next one is the assembly lines. In the assembly lines, there is the raw firmware binaries, because at a certain point you need to flash raw plain text firmware binary to the system, because you were not able, for example, to install the keys and even the decryption mechanism on the microcontroller unit. Then you will have the hardware calibration data. That might be also handy. Then you will have the security configuration, also containing this kind of information that might be useful in the reconnaissance activities of the hackers, and also if the hardware calibration data and the security configuration and in the development infrastructure a lot of other data such as the requirements and the source code gets tampered, gets manipulated, that also might induce the vehicle to fall in regards with cybersecurity. So at a certain point, at this point, we should speak about the integrity as well, and not just the confidentiality. So if someone accesses this kind of information and modifies it, that can also cause you big trouble. And then you have the ECU impersonation crypto material, which is also might come in handy when, for example, attackers might want to impersonate vehicles, and this way they can attack not the vehicle, or might not attack the vehicle, but might attack the backend. That's also a big trouble. And let's just think about the garage workshops. They have the diagnostic manuals, they have the access credentials. These are something that must be managed and must be monitored, at least that who access this kind of information and what measures do they take to prevent unauthorized access to this kind of information. I think the bare minimum is to keep the surface outside of the organizations at a minimum. These outside of organizations entity can be certainly the garage workshops, and it should be or could be some assembly lines that provide manufacturing as a service. And the access rights, if managed properly, and the monitoring, if managed properly, will increase the cybersecurity of the vehicles on a next level, the level we seek for, the level we strive for, to assure that the safety of the roads and the privacy of our personal data will remain safe if we sit in the vehicles we love so much. Thank you for your attention, and I'm really open for any approaches of you with questions that I will be happy to answer. See you next time, and I wish you a nice evening. Bye.